Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to show you an easy technique that will help you level up your acrylic paintings, and that is making sure you add multiple layers. So I'm going to be painting this eagle, and as you can see on the screen there are different layers added to each photo, and you can really see how adding multiple layers to an acrylic painting really does improve the final look. Because that's the one thing I see in acrylic painting sometimes, and it is quite a common thing with beginners, is that you just paint one or two layers and then you think the painting is finished. But you really need to utilize layers when it comes to acrylic painting. Oil painting too, but I don't do oil painting because I don't trust myself with it, because it's can be quite dangerous and I'm really clumsy and I have enough problems with getting acrylic paint everywhere, so I don't really want to be getting oil paint everywhere. Anyway, layers are really important when you do acrylic painting, and the first thing you need to start off with is the background, and I am doing a galaxy background here because this painting is actually a birthday present for one of my friends, because they have been nagging me for over a year to paint an eagle, and I finally decided to do it for their birthday, so that's why we're doing an eagle. And they also bought the bear painting that I did from a few videos ago. I'll link it up above and down below, and that also had a galaxy background, so I kind of wanted to make it a kind of sister painting so it would go well with that one. Hopefully they'll like it and put it up next to it, who knows. But if you're watching, you have to watch the whole of the video, otherwise you won't actually get the real painting, and I'll be quizzing you, so make sure you watch it or you won't get the painting. So anyway, back to talking about the art techniques. So it's important to do your background first as your first layer. I know I talked about in my last video that when I use markers I don't always do this, but I'm going to from now on, because markers are not an opaque medium. It doesn't really matter too much, but with acrylic painting it's important to do the background first because your foreground image will stand out so much better. So for the background I did a blend of blue and red to make the darker parts. I didn't use any black because I don't like using black in painting at all. I avoid it as much as possible. So I have used no black in this painting at all, let alone the background, and the darker parts of the background are red added to the blue, which kind of gives it a bit more depth. So for your first layer you just need to block out the main colours and shapes. So I'm blocking out the darker parts of the feathers and the shadows, and then blending in with the lighter colours on top. And the point where you need to stop with your first layer will be the point where your colours start to get a little bit muddy, because you can blend acrylic paint, but you need to blend it when it's wet, and sometimes if you add too much paint and try and blend too quickly it starts to get a bit muddy. So if you notice your layer starting to get a bit muddy, like mine did around the eye and the beak, that is the time you need to stop and let your layer dry. And the great thing about acrylic being opaque, you'll be able to paint over this later and it won't make too much of a difference, and you will be able to hide the muddiness no problem. As you see there, it looks really muddy at the moment under the beak as well, but it does get fixed later on. And you do have to be patient when you're adding layers to painting, because you have to let them dry, otherwise it would just get into a mushy mess, which you don't want. You don't want a mushy, muddy painting. Unless you're painting mud, you might be painting mud, and then of course that works fine. But yeah, you don't want a mushy, muddy painting. And you also need to be prepared for it to look ugly in the early stages. You always have your first layer might not look as good, but the first layer is just for blocking out the colours and the shapes. You don't have to add any detail. Don't add any detail too quickly to your painting. You just need to block out the colours and shapes. And you can always change the shape a little bit if you get some of the anatomy a little bit wrong. I ended up doing that with this one. On the next layer or two you can slowly, gradually change the shape, because again, acrylic is a lovely, lovely opaque medium that allows you to do this. So adding a second layer to the eye now, and again this did get a little bit muddy, so I had to stop and take a step back and fix it in the next layer. And you can really see the progression if you stop, let it dry, come back to it. You can really see, and it gives you a nice break as well. So on this second layer I'm just adding a little bit more detail now. So I'm adding the nostril on the beak and just blocking that out, and adding a few more colours into the beak, adding a little bit of green and just sculpting out the feathers. And I'm also making sure the brush strokes go in the direction of my feathers as well, which is a good technique if you are painting fur or feathers. You want to brush stroke and make the marks go and follow the lines of the fur or the feathers. So again, on your second layer, you are just building on the first layer really. You're building on the layer underneath and just emphasizing the shadows a little bit more and emphasizing the highlights and sculpting out the shape. And again, once it begins to get a little bit muddy, or if you notice it getting a bit muddy, stop, let it dry, take a step back and come back to it later on. So this technique also works if you do use oil paints. Like I said, I don't use oil paints, but I've noticed a lot of people do an underpainting in acrylic to get their first layer to block out the colours and then add the oil paints on top to get a nice smooth blend and to get detail. But I think you can get just as much detail with acrylic paint as you can with oil paint. It just dries a lot faster, so if you do want to blend, you just have to work that little bit quicker. But also having the wet on dry technique like you do in watercolour is quite advantageous too. So now I'm on my third layer, and again just adding the more details. I'm adding some of the finer lines to the mouth around the beak and adding some of the finer feathers, adding some of the white highlights around the eye, and just really going in there with a thinner brush. And again, the thickness of your brush will change over the layers. You'll start with the bigger brushes on the first two layers, and then when you move on to the next few layers, you'll grab your thinner brush, and this will help you add precise detail. But remember, clean your brushes between sittings, because I forgot to do that between two of my layers and just left the brushes and then came back to them and they were all hard because the acrylic had dried on them. So that was a fun job. So that's a top tip. Remember to clean your brushes between layers. And also you can add some different hues to the different layers as well, because in the white part between the eye and the beak, the bird has some blue and tiny bits of green hue rather than it just being white, and that was quite helpful to do on another layer and then add another layer on top, so it made it a little bit more subtle. And adding different hues in different layers means that it makes the hue a little bit more subtle, because if something has a subtle hue, then it's easier to do in a mid layer, for example, and then build up on top of it to kind of cancel it out a little bit. And now I'm just adding a bit more gold to the feathers, to the eagle's feathers, because I wanted the gold to come through a bit more. But again, I did this on, I think this is about the third layer now we're on, and it just kind of lifts it if you do it this way, rather than trying to do everything on one layer. You don't want to do it like a painting by numbers. You don't want to draw out every single little detail first and then try and colour it in like a painting by numbers, because that will not necessarily work unless you're really good at painting by numbers. Yeah, and it just makes it look a little bit more lifelike if you do it this way, if you add layers of highlights and shadows rather than just try and do it all at once and just get in a bit of a muddle. So that's my top tip for you really. I've kind of just rambled about how to do layers. I'm not sure how helpful it is, but again, I'll put the layers at the end of the video so you can see how it works, how the different layers work, and how I added different bits at different times, and you can really see what I mean more than I'm actually saying it, because I'm not really very good at voiceovers or explaining myself, but hopefully you see what I mean. So on that note, do subscribe to my channel. I do many kind of art advice videos, speed paints, challenges. I have some collaborations as well. So do have a look around. Oh, I also have a mouse character called Charlie. He's not really been on my channel very much. I've been neglecting him. He's not very happy at the moment, but I hope that I will be doing some more videos of him soon. So do subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any videos, because at the moment I don't really have an upload schedule. I'm just kind of uploading when I want to, because I'm making quite a lot of videos for work, so I'm having to like fit my own channel around work. But if you want to see what I'm making for work, go over to my community tab, because I have them all on there. And if you like this video, emotionally, do leave it a like down below, as that really does help me out. So here are the 4 layers again. This was the first layer. You can kind of see what it is. It's kind of a little bit muddy in places. And then this was the second layer, a little bit more detail. Third layer, almost done, but not quite. Some parts still need a little bit more attention, and this is the final result. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you find this technique helpful. That's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.